here it is. This is the final
No, Coke.
opening day preparation by the grounds crew. So this is April of 1952, and you can see, yeah, if you're not from Milwaukee, maybe even if you are, the ballpark is located where Interstate 43 is right now, running north-south, downtown, north of downtown, between 7th and 8th Streets, which are the two streets that are on the sides of the expressway, between Burleigh on the north and Chambers on the south. And you can see that they didn't build a lot of open space around the ballpark. In those days, a ballpark took up as much space as it needed to. They had no parking, of course.
That's cool.
And you can see that if you hit one down the left field line, you could probably hit it under 300 feet and still hit one of the houses. So they said that the distance to the foul pole was about 267, depending on who was measuring that day. So this is what the ballpark looked like inside. And a lot of incredible things happened here. A lot of incredible things happened in every ballpark, of course. But Orchard Field was the home of the Brewers from 1888 until it was torn down after the 1952 season. So when it was built, it cost about $40,000, including the land. And the time it was built, the White House didn't yet have electricity. So they did not know how long ago that was.
53.
Let's see what's next. Anybody recognize this young man?
Thank you. Pardon?
Probably not. Well, this is Clark Griffin.
Stadium.
Now, Clark
Because they
Griffin
moved
is not normally
53,
associated with the Brewers.
Yeah.
We
Although
think of him with the
County
Senators.
Stadium was built
But
for
he got his
the
start in
minor league
baseball
Brewers.
with the Creams, actually, they would call it at the time.
Just like
in 1888. He was the first
built
really
for the
outstanding,
Minneapolis Millers.
well-known ball player that came out of this park. And he grew up in the wilds of Missouri right after the Civil War. He knew nothing about baseball. His family moved to Illinois to get away from an epidemic. And he discovered baseball and became an outstanding pitcher. Won over 200 big league games. This is a very young picture of a man named Henry Killelea. And Killelea was the owner, along with his brother Matthew, of the Milwaukee Brewers. They were in the Western League, and then they were among the founders of the American League. That's a whole other story. But for those of you who are not aware of it, the American League was born in a hotel in Milwaukee, the Republican House, located downtown.
You put up a flag there, right?
There
You
is
got
a
your
flag there.
ballots?
Placed during
Get the ballots?
SABR convention in 2001. That's correct. So Killelea
Got your ballots?
was an attorney. He was probably the most prominent trial lawyer in Milwaukee. And among other things, he was one of the founders of the American League. Killelea also played football. There's an interesting story. He played for the University of Michigan, and they made a trip to the east to play against Harvard. Harvard was a perennial power.
That's yours?
And during the game was very different in those days. They didn't do a lot of trickery. They would simply call out, instead of calling a play, they would yell out the name of the player who was going to get the ball. And he would run through the line, push from behind, attack from the front, and all afternoon, Killelea kept getting the ball and carrying him. They'd yell, Killelea, Killelea. Well, the players from Michigan thought they were just calling out the name of their ball carrier, but people from Harvard thought they were yelling, Kill-Lee. So Lee was the name of one of their players. So this started to last over 20 years. The two universities go off athletic relations. Anyway, that was Henry Killelea. A lot of interesting stories about him. Here's another one of the founders of that meeting where they founded the American League. The man on the right, of course, Connie Mack. And on the left, all Chicagoans know him. He played there. Al Simmons. Simmons, of course, is a native Milwaukeean. The only Hall of Fame member born in Milwaukee. This picture was taken at an amazing dinner in November of 1951. It was the first meeting and induction ceremony of the Wisconsin Athletic Hall of Fame. And they inducted, well, there were 14 guys that night. And just the gathering of talent in that room was amazing. So that's when this was taken. Connie Mack was there, not because he was being inducted, but he was presenting the award to Al Simmons. Don Hudson was there, all kinds of incredible athletes. This one had the nickname of Catfish. If you said that word in his presence, you were thrown out of the game. This is maybe the most famous umpire of all time, Bill Clem. Bill Clem made umpiring a profession that was respectable. He started in the American Association in 1905, and he established, let's say, respect for the umpires. At that time, they were umpiring most games with one umpire. You can imagine how easy that was. He was the one who insisted that the umpires have a place to change clothes. Before that, they didn't have anything. They would go to a nearby house, or maybe they'd have a shed that they used for the equipment to cut the grass. So anyway, Bill Clem got his start in the American Association, and there were a number of things that he did in Orchard Field, one of which was he had heard that there was this hot-headed player for Milwaukee, and he would often come running in from center field to express his displeasure with the umpire. And he was warned that this guy might do that, so the guy sure enough did, and was guilty. He came running in, and he was very threatening, menacing, and Clem did something that he became famous for. He took his pole and drew a line in the dirt. And as the guy approached, he said, "Young man, if you cross that line, you'll regret it." Well, the guy was so taken aback by it that he stopped. And Clem actually did that a few other times when he became a major league umpire. But he started that tradition in Orchard Field. The thing about Catfish is that one of the players thought his mouth, his lips, made him look like a catfish. So if you said that word in his presence, you were immediately ejected. Rube Waddell, you can see the name there at the bottom. There are so many stories about Rube Waddell that it would take us the rest of the meal. But Waddell did play in Orchard Field. He also played in the other ballpark in Milwaukee, the Lloyd Street Grounds. So when the American League started in Milwaukee in 1900 and again in 1901, those games were played in a different ballpark. But Waddell came back later, about 10 years later, and did some pitching in Orchard Field. Everybody knows Waddell's stories, how he would be scheduled to pitch, and instead of showing up, he would be outside the park shooting marbles with the neighborhood kids, or he'd be chasing a fire engine. He loved fires. There was a story. He was pitching in 1900 for Milwaukee, and Connie Mack was the manager. And it was a doubleheader. And Waddell pitched the first game, pitched a complete game, and won. And he was so excited about it that he did a handspring after the game. And Mack came up to him and said, "If you have all that energy, how would you like to pitch the second game?" He said, "If you do that, it would be a short game." They played a short second game in the doubleheader. He said, "If you're willing to do that, you can stay here when the team goes to Kansas City, and you can go fishing for 3 days." Well, he loved fishing. So he took him up on it. And while he was off on his little fishing excursion to Pewaukee Lake, which is west of Milwaukee, there was a fire fire in a nearby barn, and he helped to put out the fire, and he saved some of the livestock. He pulled a wagon out of the barn by himself, and a reporter from the Milwaukee Sentinel talked to him afterwards, and he described what he had done during the fire, and he said, "I'm a peach in a fire." So he loved those. Anyway, the stories about Waddell go on and on. You can tell who this is just by what he's doing. Ty Cobb was one of a kind, and if you were going to take him out, you took your chances. And Cobb played in Borchard Field in 1913. In the final week of the season, the Tigers were playing the White Sox, and they took a day off because they had an exhibition game in Milwaukee in Borchard Field. And they came up and played against the Brewers, and then they went back the next day and finished their series. What that showed was that these exhibitions that were played, many of which were in Borchard Field, were more important than the league games to a lot of the teams. If they were out of the pennant race, it meant nothing anyway, and they could make more money because of the exhibition games attracting a bigger audience. This is Juneau Park in Milwaukee. It's on the east side overlooking the lake, obviously. Solomon Juneau was the first mayor of the city of Milwaukee. He founded the Milwaukee Sentinel. He's buried across from where we have our local SABR meetings. That's his big claim to fame now. His nephew was the head groundskeeper at Borchard Field. And what was his name? No. Hi, Jim Thorpe. This picture was taken at the 1912 Olympics, which is where Thorpe, of course, gained his initial fame. And the interesting thing to me, it's hard to tell from the picture that he's wearing two shoes that don't match. And they also look like they're really tight because they were. He got over to Stockholm where the Olympics were being held, and somebody stole his shoes. So he was able to borrow one shoe. I don't know how this happens. And he found one in a waste container. So here he is in ill-fitting shoes that don't even match, and he set all his Olympic records. So that's where he got his initial fame, but that's a long story. Here he is with the Reds. He played with the Giants and the Reds. He couldn't hit the curve. He could really run, but he couldn't hit the curve. Go back to this. All right, Thorpe again. In 1922, the National Football League was founded. And one of the teams in the league was the Milwaukee team, called the Milwaukee Badgers. The Packers were in the league. And one of them was a team made up entirely of Native Americans. The player-coach was Jim Thorpe. It was a guy in Ohio who hired Thorpe to recruit all the Native Americans he could get on this team. And they played 2 years in the National Football League. They were the Oorang Indians. The Oorang Indians had players like Xavier Downwind, Wrinkle Meat, Bear. They had a guy who would come out at halftime, and in the middle of the field, he would wrestle a bear. So this was for entertainment. The guy who started the team actually was an owner of a dog kennel, and he raised Airedales, which was a fairly new breed. So to advertise his Airedales, he bought an NFL franchise. It cost him $100. And they would play the other NFL teams. They played in Borchard Field, November 19th, 1922. And the best player on the Oorang team was the 39-year-old coach, which was Jim Thorpe. In that same game, Paul Robeson, who was known primarily as a singer and an actor, He was also a very good football player. He was an All-American football player at Rutgers. And so Robeson, to help pay his expenses at law school at Columbia, played weekends in the National Football League. He played for the Milwaukee team in Orchard Field. And in that game that I mentioned with the Ouray Indians, there were 2 touchdowns scored. It was a 13-0 game. And both touchdowns were scored by Paul Robeson. So Orchard Field was not just a baseball diamond. They had football all the time in the fall. I don't want to get into that.
Let it run, let it.
This is where Jim Thorpe resides today. When Thorpe died, 1953, there was controversy about where he would be buried. And his wife, I think it might have been his 3rd one, I'm not sure, wanted some place that would honor Thorpe with a monument of some kind. And no one around Oklahoma, where he was from, seemed interested in doing that. So she kind of shopped him around, and there were 2 very small towns in Pennsylvania, Mauch Chunk and East Mauch Chunk. And these cities were cities, settlements, whatever you call them, were looking for something to bring in more people, bring in residents, businesses, tourists, anybody. So they made an arrangement with her that they would build this monument if they could name their new town, which would be a merge of the 2, Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. And that's what they did. That's where he's buried today, under this marble structure. It's still going on with controversy. There are relatives who want to move back to Oklahoma, so stay tuned. This was in Orchard Field, October 28, 1928. On the left, Al Simmons. Al did a lot of barnstorming with various teams, and he played exhibitions frequently in Orchard Field. The middle guy, you probably know from somewhere. And the guy on the right, George McBride. McBride had a good job at Chapman's department store in downtown Milwaukee. He worked in the men's department, and one day he told his father, "I'm quitting my job and I'm going to go play baseball." His father told him he was an idiot. He said he didn't want anything to do with him if he was going to do that. But he did it anyway. He became a professional ball player. He was a shortstop with the Senators for 13 years. Probably the best shortstop in the league at the time. And he must have been good because his career batting average, I think, is the lowest of anyone in history that played over 10 years. I think he hit .216. But he's also a manager of the Tigers one year that he got hurt in an accident. Here's Al Simmons when he was very young. He was the Duke of Mitchell Street on the south side of Milwaukee. Should I stop or should I just talk about it? It's up to you. Unser Joel Hauser. There's Unser Joel. Manning Vaughn was the guy that nicknamed him. And he was the first professional ball player to hit more than 60 home runs in 2 different seasons. Of course, you knew that. He didn't do that in Milwaukee, but he did play a number of years in Milwaukee. This is one of my favorite baseball-related photos of all time. The guy on the top is named Giordano, Frank Giordano. And he was a 21-year-old guy. He looks older to me, a little pudgy. The umpire that he's attacking is George Majorkirk. George Majorkirk was a bully. He was one of the rare umpires that instead of taking abuse from players, abused the players. There was a player from the Brewers named Ivy Griffin, and Majorkirk beat him senseless, missed several months of the season. So the umpire looks like he's losing here. Actually, it probably was a draw at the end. The interesting thing about it is that this is not an irate fan, which everyone assumed it was. The game in Ebbets Field, where this was taken, had ended in some controversy about whether a guy at first was safe or out. And so he came out of the stands. People said, well, this is going to be great. There's something good to watch. It turns out that he came out of the stands to create a diversion so that his friends and compatriot would go through the stands picking pockets. That's one of the all-time great pickpocket stories. George Major. For the Chicago people, here he is.
Papa Bear.
Papa Bear, which is the title of the chapter, actually, in the book that's coming out in 2 months. George Hallis was a baseball player, he was a football player, he was a football pioneer. You probably know more about him than I do, but 1919, he played in the Rose Bowl. He played for Great Lakes against a team of Marines, I think it was. That was 1919. And the most valuable player in that Rose Bowl was George Hallis. Hallis then went and joined the Yankees in spring training. And it was in spring training that he hurt himself sliding and was never the same ball player after that. He then, early in 1919, was sent down to the minors by the Yankees, and he played for St. Paul. And they played 7 games in Orchard Field, so that was his first connection to Orchard Field. He later played exhibition games there with the Bears, and then became their coach and coached games that the Bears played there. Let's go back one. Let me tell you one other thing about George Hallis. George Hallis, in 1915, had a summer job for Western Electric in Chicago. And Western Electric was a very large employer, and their workers were mostly immigrants. Low paid, they worked long hours. They didn't get a lot of money, but once a year, the company would treat them to a picnic. So they put all these workers, usually about 2,500 of them, onto a couple of steamships in the Chicago River, and they would take them to Michigan City, I think, and they would have a big picnic. And in 1915, Hallis was working for that company and was expected to be on one of the boats, but he overslept. And because of that, the boat that he was supposed to be on was already gone. It hadn't sailed, it sank. It was tied to the dock. It's still a terrible tragedy, one of the worst not only in Chicago, but in the United States history. A steamship was still tethered to the dock. It rolled over. Most of the people who drowned, and it was over 800 people. They claimed 844 people died. Most of them suffocated, even before they were drowned. So, anyway, that was George Hallis' story. This is Cap Calloway. Cap Calloway was a band leader. You might know him from the Cotton Club. And Cap Calloway is famous for one song. The Hi-Hi, Hi, Hootie, 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 Hoo. He was doing a live performance on the radio at the Cotton Club, and he had recently written this song, and it was Winnie the Moocher, and he forgot the lyrics. So here he is live on the radio, and he didn't know what to do, so he did scat singing. Hi, 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 and that's how that became his claim to fame. Now, the reason he's in here from Orchard Field is he brought his band to Milwaukee to perform in one of the local nightclubs. This was in the 1930s. 1937, I believe. And he had a baseball team. Callaway was a frustrated athlete. He was a good basketball player and baseball player. And his team was made up of his other musicians from his band. And they would play against local teams as they would travel around. So one of the biggest crowds in the history of Orchard Field was there to see Cap Callaway. Joe Lewis was supposed to be the umpire of that game. He was in Kenosha, actually, preparing for a fight. And he was delayed and arrived late, so he didn't umpire. But he did show up there. Now, everybody knows this guy, right? Mulberg.
Yeah.
Catcher was a spy. I don't want to get into the culture. He came into Milwaukee, Orchard Field, 1933 for an exhibition that the Senators played.
4-piece chicken?
You know this guy?
4-piece chicken.
President of the United States. Leslie King Jr., that's correct. Better known by his later name, which was Gerald Ford, yes. He was born as Leslie King Jr.
Born in Omaha.
He was a very good football player. He was offered a contract by the Green Bay Packers. Packers sent him a letter and started out, "Dear Ford." Very informal, I'll say. The Dean brothers, 1934, they were the stars of the World Series. Each of them won 2 games, and then 6 days after the World Series ended, they were in Orchard Field for an exhibition game. They had a contract that said that they would be paid X number of dollars. One of them was to pitch 5 innings, and one was to pitch 4 innings. As it turned out, one of them pitched 2 innings, and the other pitched no innings. They left the field, they went and picked up their receipts at the box office and took off. This created a riot. People in Milwaukee had been ripped off. So they called out the riot squad, which was 1 car, 2 cops. They broke it up. The game was played against Satchel Paige. Paige was the pitcher for the opposition team, which was the Kansas City Monarchs.
Oh, thank you.
Josh Gibson appeared a couple of times in Orchard Field. There were quite a few Negro League teams that played in Orchard Field. The Chicago American Giants actually played there frequently. It was their backup home ballpark. So when they couldn't get into Comiskey, they would play their games in Milwaukee. And this is Gibson receiving awards for something. He hit a home run that cleared 8th Street. On August 3rd, 1938, the guy on the left, Wild Bill Zuber, was pitching against the guy on the right, Ted Williams, who was playing for Minneapolis at the time. And Zuber, whose nickname, by the way, was Goober, Zuber, hit Williams just behind the ear with a pitch and knocked him down. He was out for probably 5 minutes, made a recovery and came back a couple days later and was able to play. But nearly ended his career in Orchard Field. This is the Olympics 1936. These are the 2 outstanding sprinters in the world. The woman is Helen Stevens from the U.S. and the guy on the right, of course, Jesse Owens. The reason they're here is that a number of times they appeared in Orchard Field doing exhibitions of their running skill. So they would run short races against players or occasionally against a horse. And the horse won, by the way.
Thanks.
These nicely coiffed young men are the House of David. The House of David, if you don't know, was a religious cult founded in 1903 in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And to publicize their cult, to get people to join their religion, they would send out baseball teams, and they, for a while, they even had basketball. So, they didn't believe in haircuts. They also did not believe in sex, even between married partners.
I think that's.
You can understand why their religion. There was one fatal flaw there. Anyway, they appeared numerous times in Orchard Field. They were the first people to play a night game in Orchard Field. They brought portable lighting. Here's another shot of the House of David. The man on the left was a very famous pitcher, Robert Cleveland Alexander. At the end of Alexander's career,
Put it in the middle of the team.
He played several years with the House of David. He was usually the only one without the long hair.
Could he subscribe to their other rules?
I don't know, but I'll see if I can find out. This is Jackie Mitchell on the left. Jackie Mitchell is famous for supposedly striking out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig back-to-back, 1937. Yeah. And of course that was probably set up, but it made a nice story. And then she traveled with the House of David, and she typically would pitch the first inning and then retire from the game. So she did that in Orchard Field in 1937. Also traveling often during one or 2 years with the House of David team was this lady on the left and also the right. Two different pictures of her. Dave Didrikson at the time, later was a Harriet after she married. This was from the 1932 Olympics. She gained her fame. She was undoubtedly the greatest athlete, female athlete in the world at the time. She did win the Olympic gold in the javelin throw. She also won the hurdles. I think it was an 80-yard hurdle. The other event was the high jump. She went higher than anybody else bar. I have no idea what that looks like or why that was illegal, but they took away her gold medal for that. The reason she's here, she also has a connection, of course, to Orchard Field. Wasn't everybody? When traveling with the House of David, she also would pitch the first inning. She did pitch the first inning. Then after the game was over, they played 2 more innings of donkey baseball. So she joined in that also. Bill Buegge, famous Chicagoan, who actually got his start in Orchard Field. He and Charlie Grimm were the owners of the team. They bought the team in 1941. And a lot of Buegge's stunts and gimmicks that he created were created initially in Milwaukee and then transferred to Chicago later. Here they are, 1944. The Chicks and their manager, Max Carey. They were only in Milwaukee for 1 year, and they won the championship. They were the first professional championship I think that Milwaukee had in just about anything. And then they left after 1944. They didn't draw well, and part of the reason was they were up against the Brewers. The Brewers, managed that year by Casey Stengel, had all of the ideal dates and times, and it was just very difficult for the ladies to compete, and so they left after 1 season. Here's Casey Stengel, who was the manager in 44. He was the manager the night that the roof blew off the ballpark. It landed on 7th Street and on the porches of houses across the street. Over 30 people were hurt. Nobody miraculously was killed. They never repaired the roof. To do that, they would have had to bring the entire place up to code. And they couldn't do that because the law said they could not spend more than 50% of the initial cost of building the place to repair it. And they built it for almost nothing in 1888, so they were unable to repair it. They simply left it off for the last 8 years. Johnny Price, also known as Jackie Price. It's a little hard to see here, but Jackie Price was maybe the most amazing player in any baseball setting ever. He could do things with a baseball and a bat that were just amazing. In the lower right, you can see him with a sling, like David would have had in the life. And he would throw this baseball high in the air, and then he would go out and catch it, and usually in his Jeep. The middle on the bottom, it's hard to tell, but he's standing on his head, literally on his head. He's not using his hands to hold him up. On the left, lower left, he's hanging upside down from a contraption that he built. It's like a bar with the gymnastics. And he would hang upside down and then take batting practice. He had large hands and he could hold 3 baseballs in one hand and with one motion throw one to a guy over there, one guy over there, and one over there. He could have someone hit long fly balls and he would take off in his Jeep and he would catch them in his Jeep. Just an amazing person. Played for the Brewers in 1945 briefly. He toured for a number of years. Jackie Price. These are 2 guys that, this was the 1953 combination, double play combination for the Braves. The year before, in 52, here they are in a Brewer uniform, playing, of course, in Buegge Field. Harry Truman gave a speech in 1948. He was running for re-election, and he appeared in Buegge Field, spoke to a large crowd, which seems amazing in itself, and he gave a speech on atomic energy in Buegge Field. Vern Gagne, one of the most famous Midwestern wrestlers, briefly a Green Bay Packer. And Gagne wrestled a number of times in Buegge Field. So they always had wrestling matches, they had boxing matches. Now you might know, he played in 3 games, 1951, in Buegge Field. Willie Mays, everybody knew was a sensational player and was about to go to the major leagues. His second last minor league series that he played was in Buegge Field. He played a single game and a doubleheader. He went 9 for 14, and everybody knew that he was going to the majors, and after 3 games in Kansas City, he did. Matthews and Mantle, both of them played against each other. This was in July of 1951. Mickey Mantle was a sensational rookie with the Yankees, but he wasn't hitting. He was striking out too much, so they sent him down to their minor league team in Kansas City. And he joined the team in Milwaukee at Buegge Field. And also in that series was Eddie Matthews, who had recently gotten off the Navy and was trying to play his way up to the majors. So they played against each other in 1951. Matthews again on the right in his Boston Braves cap. On the left, Dave Barnhill. Barnhill was one of the outstanding pitchers of the Negro Leagues. He was pretty much over the hill at this point. He was pitching in a game during the short time that Matthews was with the team. Barnhill was the pitcher and Matthews the hitter. The bases were loaded. Matthews hit a grand slam. This was the first black pitcher he ever faced. And he hit a grand slam. And after the game, the team did what it always did, went to the bar across the street to celebrate. And manager Charlie Grimm came in and congratulated Eddie on his home run and said, "We're sending you to Atlanta." So he Back to Atlanta.
SABR.
You can see all these Yankees. The second from the left is a well-known Milwaukeean. Debut high school is Tony Buegge. And Tony played in Orchard Field as a sandlot player. And he played in the first team in New York that year. And Buegge's father had played in the 30s in Orchard Field. He never made the majors. This is probably the most famous Milwaukeean in the world. Bob Uecker, who also played in Orchard Field as a sandlot player. In the game where they qualified for the first team, he was actually the leading hitter. He walked, he got a single, and he got a triple. But they didn't select him to go to the New York team. And that's the end. Questions?
Yes.
All right, Dennis?
Bob, when's the book coming out?
Sometime in March, that's all I know. It will be published by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press.
Bob.
That's all I know.
On your first slide, the left field wall, you had your circles.
Yes.
My favorite candy bar, which no longer exists.
Really? You don't make it
I
anymore?
don't know if they do. I've never seen it.
I think so.
I thought maybe in your research you would have found out what happened to circles.
I'm sure you'll look it up. I didn't come across that at all.
When was the lights installed? When did Orchard Field get lights?
They got lights in 1935. The first night game that they played was in 1930. That was a House of David game, but they had their own portable lighting system, which couldn't have been the greatest. And then 1935, they finally put in the lights, and in 1942, they moved those light standards so they weren't in play. Before that, a number of players had been injured running into them. And if I'm correct, I think you were the one who told me this. Aren't you the one that the light standards from Orchard Field are the ones that Henry Aaron Park?
Yes. Yeah, they are. It still exists.
So did the Orchard Field get torn down because County Stadium was built right there at about the same time?
Yes, it was, well, this is a long story. I showed you a picture of that attorney, Henry Philby. He was the attorney for Ida Bell Borchard, and she inherited the team when her husband died. He was speaking at a pre-season dinner